And then one guy said, well, I can't even draw a straight line. I said, nobody can. That's why every art supply store in the country has an aisle of rulers and T-squares and rulers.
Your guide on our little adventure as we explore how to be present and kind as we do great things. Today, my guest is Craig McNair Wilson. Well, I first met Craig Wilson in the late 70s when he performed his one-man play, The Fifth Gospel, at a small church in Newbury Park, California. This was in the mid-late 70s, so we were both toddlers at the time. Then I met Craig McNair Wilson at a youth specialties conference in the early 90s that I attended, and I went to his Brainstorming Like an Imagineer. He called it that back then. Now it's a theme park designer. I next met McNair when we were both presenting at youth ministry conferences in the early 2000s. Recently, when I was working at a large corporate training university, I hired C. McNair Wilson to speak at a leadership conference and help us work on workshops around creativity for our leadership. And now I get to have Craig McNair C. McNair Wilson with me on this podcast. Welcome, Craig.
Thank you, John. You make it easy.
So I need to start with this, and it takes a little. I'm going to need to learn a little bit more. But when I say Kungaloosh, what does that mean to you?
Kungaloosh was the official greeting at the Adventurers Club, which was the premier nightclub on Pleasure Island, a nighttime experience that we created for Walt Disney World. It was at one end of what used to be called the Walt Disney World Shopping Village, and there was our architect Chris Carradine discovered this peninsula there, and he cut a swash of water, and we put two bridges and created an island. And then the whole backstory was that it was a once long gone manufacturing series of buildings. So there were plaques around the island that told what the Comedy Warehouse used to be, what the so on. And the main restaurant was the original home of Meriwether Adam Pleasure, hence Pleasure Island. And then he kept collecting all this stuff, and his wife said, got to find a place for this stuff. So up Hill Street, off to the side on the water, on the lake, he built this library that became the Adventurers Club. And so this is all a creation of a small cadre of us at Imagineering who were lovers of pith helmets and linen clothes, and not least of which was Joe Rohde, who did a couple of parties one time in his backyard that was the last days of the Raj. In other words, Britannia is leaving India, and so we're going to celebrate that. And it was great fun. And it was kind of a British Empire India version of a Renaissance festival. And out of that, and all of our love of safari movies and the Kirk brothers and so on, created that. And so as we're creating the Adventures Club, we came up with a song and a pledge and so on. And this thing that we would shout at the end of the song, Kungaloosh. And then when you greet each other, if you know that the other person is a member in good standing, you would say to them, Kungaloosh. And then it became an adult beverage, which there are some bartenders at various Disney World outposts that will make you one. And there's a few bars, not least of which at Downtown Disney, the Jock Lindsay's Hangar Bar, it's on the menu. So it's been a variety of things.
I was at Islands the other day with my family, and I asked the waitress, the server, if I could get a Kungaloosh, if the bartender knew what it was. And she went and came back, and they said, well, we don't have this one particular ingredient. But I asked, did she know what it was? No, she looked it up online. And I informed her that there was an alternative recipe. The older recipe didn't involve the special, whatever I forget what it was, the red stuff. So they made a valiant attempt at getting me an old version of the Kungaloosh at Islands in California.
Well,
So
the two Trader Sam's, both at Disneyland Hotel and Polynesian Resort, will make them. And very, it's there's no rule against it. At first, I don't know who it was, but somebody in food management was determined that they weren't going to, the Tiki Room wasn't going to, the Trader Sam's wasn't going to be the Adventures Club. But there are actual props from the Adventures Club in both of those places. So it's just,
yeah,
as
there
my
seems
mother
to be
said, put your face in this.
a very, very loyal following. At first, when I first heard about this, me having been, I've done some adventuring and like expeditions in Africa and the mountains and the oceans and all that kind of stuff. So at first I go, oh, Adventurers Club, this should be really interesting and good. And then I saw that it really was an homage to the British explorers and adventurers and that whole scene. And then it made sense to me about the pith helmets and all this other stuff. So
as far as I know, it's a word made up at Imagineering. This is me on safari going into the Ngorongoro crater in Tanzania. So I made this sign, Life's a Safari, and I adapted the motto of the Adventurers Club, which was sometimes you eat the bear, sometimes the bear eats you, but always dress for the hunt. And I've got some days you eat the lion sometimes. And then one of the schools we went to, the mothers of the Maasai children, the Maasai are these nomadic traveling group that they exist literally in 7 African countries. And so they had written a song to thank us for taking care of their children. And so this is me dancing with Maasai. And I feel so bad that I had the least colorful tennis shoes. They are all wearing tennis shoes. But it was,
I know they're jumping on your brand there.
They're very fun though. And they just started giggling profusely when I just insinuated myself into their Congo line. It was wonderful.
Yeah, and my experience with especially I had more with the Bali tribe and Shona, but what an amazing sense of humor those people groups have. They're just a blast.
Yep, everybody, especially Americans, they need to push heaven and hell to spend some time in the third world and not Tijuana.
Yeah.
At least if you're in California and the Southwest, at least get down into the interior of Mexico if you can.
Yeah. So currently, you're creativity coach, you're conference speaker, artist, author, playwright, world traveler. You've already mentioned your work with Disney as an Imagineer, and I want to hear some more about some of the stuff you're involved with there. But you're also an adjunct faculty at Colorado Christian and Chief Encouragement Officer at Assume Brilliance.
CEO.
Is what?
That's what CEO is, Chief Encouragement Officer.
Yeah. Your latest book is called Hatch.
Yes.
Brainstorming Secrets with theme park designers, and you have we're anxiously awaiting the release of the next book in that series. And what's your current title for it?
Well, first I'll say about this, one of the most read journalists in the country that writes about Disney, and I won't use his name because I'm going to tell a story that makes him sound like an idiot, and he's not an idiot. But when he reviewed the book and he loved the book, he said Brainstorming Secrets, and it's of a theme park designer, not for theme park. He says, well, it's a very enjoyable read, but I don't know why you would read it if you're not a theme park designer. And I wrote to him and I said, did you notice the word of? In other words, these are the secrets of theme park designers that you can use for your organization, your club, your church, anybody to solve, invent, create, fix, whatever. Because my experience is, and my belief is that most brainstorming sessions are not in fact brainstorming, they're playful arguing with snacks on the table. And I say, let's lose the arguing and keep the snacks. If you
I liberally steal that one from you when I'm teaching creativity and innovation stuff.
Well, if you have an idea and the person next to you says, well, how's that going to work? Or what's that going to cost? Or, well, that's silly. That's not brainstorming, that's arguing. And arguing creates nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, so I think that's such a key piece. And it goes back to the early 90s when I sat in that first workshop. I think that's really informed. Since then, I think I was getting my master's degree then, and I've worked with like executive development people, people from the big schools like Harvard and Penn and
Sure.
Northwestern, all those people. Nothing of what you offered back then and still offer now is a easily digestible approach that works with almost any population. What I do, liberally lifted from what I learned with my time with you, and adjusted a little bit for a different audience. But man, it's so relevant and so important about that whole arguing thing.
Yeah, and
Separating out critical and creative thinking is essential.
I tell every group, whether it's a single standalone workshop at a convention, just on what I call the 6 agreements of brainstorming, which is basically teaching adults to relearn playing well with others. That's why I call it the agreements. If you agree to use these 6 processes together, not pick from them, it's not a smorgasbord, that you really can do anything you want. And what I tell them at the beginning, I said, as I go through this, you say each one of these, you're going to be, well, of course you do that. Well, of course you do that. And I'll say, well, of course you don't do that. And the reason why I keep it simple, both in language, one of my pet peeves in the motivational so-called world is everybody has to make up their own word. I call my business Assume Brilliance, because what I'm saying is I'm about finding the best in everyone, whatever that is. And brilliance is just a word, a placeholder, finding the magic, finding the fun, finding whatever it is. If you've got a reticent student in a class, how do you bring them out of that? And so I'll say, you're going to understand every word of these 6 rules of brainstorming. And I don't even like to call them rules,
right.
But that's so everybody will get it and can remember it. And people say, well, whenever they say, well, that's kind of simplistic. And I said, well, I've done this with NASA scientists and doctors and college professors, and they love it. So I don't know what your problem is.
I got this whole thing around the difference between simplistic and simple.
Yes.
Simplistic means that you haven't gone through the hairball, you haven't gone through the mess, and it means that you don't know what's coming. But when you go through the complexity and you come out the other side, that's when it gets simple. And more recently, Essentialism, the book came out, which is the same idea.
Yes.
Marie Kondo even is the same way. You don't just start asking, does this give me joy? First thing you do is you dump everything on your bed. You make it messy first, and you've got to be willing to confront that messiness and see what squeezes out on the other side as the most simple, as the essential. So that's why I love that process that you've sent me down and helped me explore that.
Now the question began, second book.
Yes.
I knew this book grew out of my being at Imagineering, and they noticed when I had a team of people, either that I was facilitating or even just on the team, because I began there as a consultant and then went full time, that any team I was a part of, we got to big ideas, lots of ideas, and quickly. And they said, do you have a system? And I said, yeah, it's a combination of infant sacrifice and standing waist deep in tapioca. And of course, they'd say, well, how many peas in tapioca? In other words, they didn't care. They want to know, is it a transferable concept and can you teach it? So as I'm teaching it at Imagineering, the 6 agreements, 7 agreement, 6, 7, anyway, 7 agreements of brainstorming.
I use 7, whether they're from you or not, I'm not sure, but I got to say they're grounded in your work. So
yeah, they and then they asked me to do it for Disney executives at the studio through, again, Disney University. And our CEO at the time, Michael Eisner, had been in my brainstorming class, and so he wrote a memo strongly encouraging. And I don't even think he used the word encouraging. He says, I want you all to take this with your top people. The very first session, there were 3 gentlemen that I knew, head of 3 of the big 20 of the 23 divisions. And they said, we understand your system. We like it. Want you to teach it to our staff. But we agreed, the 3 of us, we're not personally creative. And I said, well, what does that even mean? And as I unpacked it, they'd say things like, well, I can't draw stick figures. I said, yes, you can, because you played hangman in the back of the bus on the way to camp, and you can't play that without the. And then one guy said, well, I can't even draw a straight line. I said, nobody can. That's why every art supply store in the country has an aisle of rulers and T-squares and rulers and triangles. and they sell them to really talented artists. I went to the Minneapolis College of Art Design on a full scholarship. Never once, John, in the application, first day of class, ever did they say, oh, by the way, you can draw a straight line, can't you? Never came up, because it's not a test for anything. So I thought, what do they mean? And what they meant was they weren't artistic. And that's such a narrow, being artistic is sort of a very obvious sign. You're a singer, you're an actor, you're a painter, you're a designer. And so I spent a year talking to everybody I knew who was what I call actively creative, because I don't think we're creative and non-creative. I think we're actively and inactively creative throughout our day. When you take a shortcut between two familiar spots, that's your creative spirit and in action. Freud said frustration is the early warning sign of creativity. It's saying, this isn't working, what can we do to solve it? And so I came up with the 4 habits, not the most common, but 4 very common habits practiced by creative people. That became my TED Talk that's linked online. That is probably the talk that I do most as a keynote at conventions of every type, whether it's ministry professionals or, as I've said before, NASA scientists, whatever. Chick-fil-A owners, do a lot of work with Chick-fil-A over the years. And then that leads to other questions. And so the new book is based on that. It is the 4 habits. And what that means, so it's a book that will help unpack for everybody their natural, what I call factory installed creator spirit, if you will, which can be a big C or a little c. I'm on kind of a one-man crusade to get us to stop using creatives as a noun and just say creators. What's wrong with saying it was a room full of creators? So whatever. And I don't yell at people when they say creatives. It is what it is. And as I'm writing this new book, and it's almost finished, in other words, my part of it is almost done, the writing. I discovered a 5th habit, and it was there all along. It was there all along. So we call it the hidden habit, and I have a new seminar, talk, keynote, whatever. In fact, you were there at the thing this last spring where I did that, the hidden habit of creative. So the new book will be that book to help people understand their own creativity. Interestingly enough, knowing I was going to write that second book on that subject, I kind of went out of my way that as I was writing Hatch, if I wrote something that was about encouraging people's personal creativity, I pulled it out. And I'd save it, and I pull it out. And yet, within the first 4 or 5 online reader reviews on Amazon.com, people saying, and not only is the brainstorming thing great, but he really reminds you that you are creative. I'm saying, no, that's the next.
Not yet.
So I realized I just can't help myself. That's really what I'm up to.
Yeah, and I love, as somebody who's deeply involved in changing behaviors of people to make them more effective and efficient, the idea of habits versus willpower versus other things, the concept of habit is so powerful.
It's just a repeatable behavior that, if positive, suits you well. You do it instinctually. One of my favorite books on creativity is I should grab it. Choreographer. Anyway, she talks about the creative habit, and she talks about her 29 habits that have Twyla Thorpe.
Yes.
Everybody should get it. The creative habit, Twyla Thorpe. Get it, read it, use it, underline it, along with Madeline L'Engle's A Wrinkle in Time and Gordon McKenzie's Orbiting the Giant Hairball are the 3 books that I've read 5 times, cover to cover, word for word, and I dip back into all 3 of those bits and pieces all the time.
Yeah, we use a lot of words like habit, developing a habit. You don't break a habit, you exchange it. And also the concept of rituals, and the way that you create a habit is to ritualize it until it becomes your first response.
Yeah, habit is just saying, what's the way I do this?
Mm-hmm.
And everybody does this differently. You just rolled over a minute ago talking about dumping everything out on the bed and looking at it. When I travel, I typically have 2 pieces of luggage. One is clothing and all that stuff. Another is a bag that I actually got from Duluth Trading. And it's like one of those old plumber's bags, but it's green and nice, and everybody always comments on it. And at baggage claim, nothing else looks like it, so it's easy for me to grab. And in that are all the tools and resources and other books. Like there'll be a copy of Warby and John the Hairball. There's felt pens. There's copies of Hatch. There's all those kind of things, and a change of clothes.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I'll take that as great. And sometimes, if on a particularly special trip, I want to take X with me, and I'll get there and I'll think on the way, did I bring X? I always bring Y and Z. Did I bring X this time? So when I get to a hotel, and if I have a choice, I request a room with 2 beds. Not a bed and a couch, 2 beds. And the very first thing I do is dump the entire contents of that green bag out, lay it all out, and I go, good, I've got this. There's my notes, there's my felt pens, there's my stuff, there's my whistle, so on and so on and so on. And because I don't trust the things that you put around your neck for name tags, I bring a few that are comfortable for me, that I like, the Mount Herman and the Thing in different places. So just dump it all out. And the same thing then when I pack. When I'm getting ready to pack, like I'll be packing today for a trip this weekend, I put everything in that bag, and then I'll dump it out and say, is this everything I need? And so on. My brain isn't good enough, bright enough, whatever it needs to be, to remember everything that I need to bring at the moment that I'm packing. So I may spend a week setting things aside. And
Yeah.
so that's just my habit.
Yeah. Who is it? Alan, the creator of getting stuff done or getting things done, GTD, Peter Allen, I think his name is. I was listening to an interview with him yesterday. He says our brains are designed to create thoughts, not hold thoughts.
Yeah,
I love that.
That's why God invented the iPhone, or was it God or something else?
Want to talk a little bit about life before Disney. I think
let me just one last tag to the new book.
Okay.
So if people want to, as soon as I'm done writing the book, when it goes into editing and design, we will announce a pre-sale of the book, great discount. And we're not doing a lot of crazy premiums and stuff. There'll be a couple of little things like that. But if people would like to be a part of the community to do that, just connect with me on Facebook or and use the public site, McNair Wilson International Fan Club of Dry Cleaning. That's the easiest one. Or me on Twitter, McNair Wilson. And then very quickly we'll have a place where you can sign up for my new email list, and you'll get that announcement. So.
Yeah, make sure that you give that to me so that I can put it in the notes here. Hey, real quick, show me the base of your right hand, because it's the sign of a true artist / graphic artist.
And I don't know why that's there, because I'm left-handed.
It's probably holding the.
I do know why it is. I have. See if I can tilt up so you can see it. So my desk is a handmade from Africa wooden table. And you can just see the edge of it here. But the blotter is, hold on to your seats.
Okay.
One of the menus that's up on the wall at Starbucks. And when they take them down, I get them. And they're wonderful big blank areas on the back. And then what I do is, so this is where the purple came from on my hand. So I can make notes. And when that gets filled up, I just put another one down. That's
great. Hey, let me see if I can show you something. What might be fun for you if you're doing video calls and stuff. I got a new webcam. And so I took my old one, and let's see if this works here. And now I created a downside one.
Oh, that's perfect.
So I can, practice my, my sketchnoting and all that kind of stuff and have some fun with it.
That's great.
Thought it would be a fun little thing.
I've got this factory light here that eventually is going to hang right over my desk. It's not very bright, but it just kind of gives a nice pall at night. So there's not light in my eyes and so on. And one of the things I've talked about doing with that is a little webcam thing, so that as I'm talking on stuff, I can show people designs.
Yeah, because I mean, the shortcut to a person's decision-making process is visuals. Even storytelling is a visual medium because you're painting word pictures.
Oh, absolutely.
Man, you get direct access.
Absolutely. That's why in Hatch there's an entire chapter on visual thinking, which was the last thing we wrote. The book was literally done, laid out, ready to go. And my friend Max Paul Franklin of PixieDust.com, or is it it's now Max Paul Franklin Productions, I think. And Max Paul is one word with a capital P in the middle. An award-winning filmmaker. Everybody's seen him. If people remember Edge TV, that was his production and so on. And he said, when are you going to teach us how to draw? He was looking through one of my sketchbooks. I've got 150, 60, some of them that are full of stuff. And all the illustrations in Hatch are out of that. So I spent a week while he was with me writing the Doodle Factor and the 16-page McNair's Fearless Field Guide to Doodling. The evidence is that when you add visual cues to your note-taking, you do two things. You can cut the amount of notes you take by half or more. You can increase your retention of what you heard by up to 60%, just by having a word, a picture, a big, I told them at the class yesterday at Colorado Christian University, I gave them all felt pens and blank piece of paper. I said, put everything else away. They said, why are you making us do this? I said, I'm not making you do this. I'm encouraging you to do this. You don't have to write anything down, but try it. And so I wrote the first, because I did Recapture Creative Spirit. The first habit of actively creative people is to take risks. I wrote it real big on the board, and then I said, notice how I'm writing it big? Writing big when you're doing notes on an easel or something is the same as projecting. So I said, write it, the biggest thing on your paper right now should be take risks. And so we got done, and I went around the room and looked, and some of them had done that. So all they had to do at the end of the day was look at their page and see there should be 4 big 1 or 2 word phrases. That's what we talked about today.
Yeah, I do my best to be as visual, whether it's icons or in a presentation, making sure that it's graphically oriented. And again, you turned me on to these pilot pins.
Yes.
Which I can use in a large audience and still be okay with the flip charts. It's just that you do one idea per page, which you should do anyhow.
It's interesting. I've been using those for years, and I would do other conferences. And my good buddy Ken Davis, he'd go up and he would speak before me at Dynamic Communicators Workshop, or now called the SCORE Conference. And he'd start to write, and he'd write so tiny with this big pen, and it's hard to write tiny with that big pen because the nib is big. And I said, Ken, I can't hear what you're writing. And he turned around and goes, what does that mean? And then somebody else in the room says, we can't see the words, they're too small.
Yeah.
And I said, are we down to just 3 pieces of paper? So I tell people, if all you did, this is the first page of McNair's Talk Amongst Yourselves, McNair's Fearless Field Guide to Doodling. If all you did was add what we call frames or boxes or big words or arrows or circles or lightning bolts or anything, if all you did was add that to your notes this week, your notes would increase in you memorizing things. But then I get into lettering and drawing.
I know I've seen you recommend this one too, Dan Roth's book, blah, blah, blah. I backed into his stuff with his Back of the Napkin. I picked it up at an airport one day thinking it's just going to be a light read. But he's got really great evidence of the idea of visual thinking and verbal thinking and how they need to be paired up. And there's a great parallel to critical thinking and creative thinking and how they're essential, but they need to be separate and they need to communicate with each other.
One of my favorite anecdotes or examples is a study that was done at the University of Leeds in England about visual thinking. And they did this several times, 40 people in a room. 20 of them were asked to just sit there and listen. The other 20 were given a piece of paper with squares on them. And they said, we're going to play you something. As you listen, fill in the squares. Like one would with a pad next to your phone in the Holiday Inn, you'd fill in the O's and the A's and so on. When they got done, they said, now, here's a piece of paper for both groups. Write down what you heard. The people filling in the squares remembered 40% more than the people just listening, because the filling in the squares, the drawing, focuses the mind on a simple task. Whereas the other people listening, and they may be listening, says, listen, Thursday, before we go to lunch, and your mind goes here. Before we go to lunch, we need to go past Hobby Lobby and pick up boom, boom, boom. And they did that over and over and over. And every time it was the same. The people filling in the little squares remembered far more than the people just listening.
Yeah, it might be in the same study, but I think there's a different study out of Minnesota that talked about how that the idea of doodling is almost like getting rid of the white noise so that you can focus on what's going on. David Wilcox has a great song, if you know the guitar player.
Yeah.
He has a great song called "Gotta Empty Out the Inside of My Head," and in essence, that's what it's doing. It's getting rid of the distractions, and it's not fighting the distractions. Is dealing with them in a productive way by just getting that doodly energy out.
Well, it's focus. I have
Yeah.
a chapter in my book about being diagnosed with what's considered late onset ADD. And I remember I was at a university speaking to the psychological division, and I turned to the head of the division, who happened to be a family friend, and I said, "Why does ADD only have 2 Ds in it?" And he about fell off his chair. I said, "If it's about being distracted, shouldn't there be 27 Ds? Just the starter kit should be 27 Ds." And so I told him I'm an unmedicated, and I said, well, he said, "Well, did you have that as a kid?" I said, "No, they hadn't invented it yet. You know, they had, I had CSSS, can't sit still syndrome, and I still have this. On my way home today from meeting with my publisher and having breakfast, coming to knowing I was going to be with you, I had already thought about, worried about, gotten excited about being with you. On my way home to do this, I'm thinking about what I'm doing after this, you know,
Yeah.
and which is packing, but still,
Yeah. It's exciting.
Yeah, and so we're constantly planning, and people say, "Well, I'm not visual." That is baloney.
Oh, it's there. I just did a big piece of the presentation I did for doctoral program on innovation and creativity. Talks about normally they say about 2/3, over 65 to 75% of your brain is dedicated to visual processing. And there's no physiological evidence around the learning styles, kinesthetic, auditory, visual. But what they do have physiologically is that primarily your brain processes in a visual way. Even if it's auditory, even if it's even smell brings out these visual memories. And so if you want to connect with somebody, we are all visual processors.
Well, apparently 70% of lifelong learning is visual. People say, "Well, no, then you start reading." How do you read? You look at a cuneiform that it represents certain sounds, and those sounds change when they're put together with a certain letter. So when you see an A, do you right away just think, "Well, that's the letter A"? No, you think A,
It's the transition, and this, if you a great book, if you want the intro to brain science stuff, it's a book by John Medina called Brain Rules, and he talks about the power of our ability to process symbols, which is a visual process. If you want to, and I'll take advantage of my little overhead cam here. If you really want to connect with somebody quickly, you can say, let me see here. Let's talk about,
John?
What's this?
What's his name?
John Medina.
Got it.
Brain Rules. And I think this comes out of Medina. It might be someplace else. But if you want to connect with somebody, then you can say 25%, right? But they have to, even that, it's a visual processing, but they have to go from 25% to the concept, which is, this is direct visual.
Right.
And immediately they get what that picture is. And that's why you can skip a step if you're using words or in the word format. But as a graphic artist, words can be more than words. They can be a graphical representation of the concept you're trying to get across.
People will see in Hatch, I talk about this, and I say, if, for example, you're taking notes in American history class, and you say the Constitution was ratified in 1871, you could write that. Constitution ratified. Or you could make a square, and on one square, do a little triangle in the corner like it's folded over. Now you've got a document, and write Constitution 1871. In his notes, my friend who edits my books for me, who's a very left-brain fellow, but hilarious, he draws a picture of a 3-masted sailing ship with waves, U.S. Constitution, behind a little dinghy, 1871. His wife said she saw this. She says, "I've never seen him draw anything. Look what you brought out of it."
So I got a total divergent here, but I was doing leadership programs in a big corporation, and one of those programs ended with high stakes presentation to the executive board by each group on some sort of a topic. And I was helping the executives who would rate each of the presentations, helping compile that stuff. And one of the executives was listening and watching it. At first he was taking notes, and then he draws a picture of an old time, a tall ship sinking. And that was his rating. So
we all do it. I mean, we all do it. One of the examples I have in the Doodle Factor, that chapter in Hatch, is it's just a guy, and the cartoon bubble is, it says 87%. I think the word read and a line cross through it. Anyway, it's a whole workshop I took about why people are so illiterate and what we might do about that. And the standout stat was 87% of people in the Western world, that is the first world where we by and large go to school, 87% of all those people never read another book when they finish school, whether it's high school, college, or grad school, unless they're required. And a lot of them don't read a book when they're required to read it. But 87% never read another full book on any subject for any reason, pleasure, a course, or anything like that. And so I think about my friends who are going into real estate or doing this. I've got, that's a lot of people. Yeah. So I think of that when I'm writing. How can I write a book that people who don't read books will read? And I hear from those people say, I'm not much of a reader, but boy, I liked your book. Oh, I'll take that any day.
Yeah, I noticed the Orbiting the Giant Hairball uses a lot of really fun doodles and graphics as you pass through that book too.
Oh, I tell people, Orbiting the Giant Hairball was given to me by my friend Susan Kennedy, who a lot of readers will know under her nom de plume, SARK, S-A-R-K, Susan Ariel Rainbow Kennedy. She was sent the book by the publisher because of who she is. She reads very fast. She read it, gave it to me. The book was not out yet. I read 2 chapters, immediately reviewed it on Amazon, and within 20 minutes got an email from the author, and we became fast friends just via email. But I tell people, this book, if it was in a language you've never heard of, let alone can't read or write, you would want this book because it's so interesting visually. I mean, it just, from the very beginning, it doesn't stop.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, the font that we picked for the text for Hatch is Gaudi Old Style, which is a classic, famous, been around. You've probably read more books set in Gaudi Old Style than anything except maybe Garamond, and they're very similar. And I did that as an homage to Orbiting the Giant Hairball. The woman who did the layout, very talented, helped solve a lot of problems with all the busyness of Hatch. She goes, he wants Garamond? Such old. And I told her, I said, one of the big design magazines about 20 years ago, ask some of the top designers if you could spend the rest of your life with only 5 fonts, what would they be? Garamond was Gaudi Old Style was the only font on every list. We get done with the book, and she said, I like Gaudi. I really like Gaudi. Now, for Hatch, I've got another font that I found that I like, a simple Roman font, or a serif font. But anyway.
Yeah, I love that you're paying homage to people through the fonts as well as whatever you write. That's just so great.
As we used to say in SAC Theater, some jokes you just do for yourself.
Yep. I do. I'm coaching 5-6-year-old soccer players right now, and half what comes out of my mouth at practice is just to keep me sane.
I do a little trick in the new book, and it has to do with the way each chapter begins. I think people will figure it out pretty quick, but I don't say I did this. I don't explain it. I say, did you notice that? It's just there.
Just for you.
The clue is there are 25 chapters, sort of. Maybe 26.
Maybe. So I want to get your take on this. I know that you've, and it's along the same themes as Orbiting the Giant Hairball, but you have worked alongside and inside large organizations. What's it like to be a creative or a creator in the corporate world? What are the challenges? What's it like? What are your thoughts on that?
It's to be the guy with the extra finger. The phrase I used to get as a kid, you're sort of one of those larger than life guys. And I love Uta Hagen, one of the great acting coaches of all time. When one of her students says, you want us to be larger than life? She says, oh, my dear, there's nothing larger than life. The chapter that I talk about my friend Susan in the new book, when we first met, people said, you have to meet her, and so on. And she said, do people ever tell you you're larger than life? But she said it in a way that was a cry for help. Now, at this point, she'd already written 6 books, bestsellers and posters and all this stuff. By any calculus, she was famous and successful. And yet she felt like, well, maybe her books were hand printed. They were very colorful, full of art. And I just grabbed her and I said, Susan, you're not larger than life. You're actual size. This is the size of life when it's you. And so you've got to not talk about that. There's a chapter in the book, Courage to Create. I don't, and Orbiting Giant Hairball talks about this. The thing that hit me about that book was, here's a guy at Hallmark, a company where you'd say, they must be doing creativity there. I've seen some of their cards that aren't that bad. And a lot of the other simplistic dreck that they do that are just the nature of reading cards. But if Gord McAllister, who eventually launched their whole non-paper products line, Christmas ornaments and everything else, and created a division of people, when he went to interview the people that he wanted in that group, they said, what's something we should have? We're going to have our own little space. Every single one of them said, roll top desk. He didn't ask, what kind of furniture do you want? Do you want a window or not? What would be interesting for us to have there? And he thought they'd say things like, a cappuccino machine, beanbag chairs. And a lot of that came up as well. But roll top desk. Now, my email, bigdesk@McNairWilson.com, is because I have a big old roll top desk that I bought years and years and centuries ago from my friend Carolyn Coons at Azusa Pacific University. And I just love it. I love it. I have never sat at that desk and paid a bill or done any hard work. I've done leisure reading. I put my Mac down and done some writing. I've done a lot of doodling at the desk, but I've never done anything but pretty much right-brained or even creative left brain stuff. What you got to do is figure out what you love doing. Find out how many places you can get away with doing that. My phrase, if you don't do you doesn't get done and the world is incomplete. If you can't do some of you at your current job, whatever that is, and I've yet to meet anybody with whom, if we get a few minutes, we can't figure out a way for them to put part of themselves. Michelangelo said, get away with as much of creativity as you can, however small it might be. Because you do that little thing of you go, oh, why does he get to do that? Why does she get to do that? Whether it's just taking an interesting piece of African fabric that you got on your trip and putting it over the back of your chair. Everybody's got the same Aeron chair from Steelcase, 700 and some of us at Compassion International. I was there for a year. And I would just do little things just to make the space myself, never to show off, never to say, look what I did. I put something not in the shelf, but on the top of the shelf so people could see it across the whole floor. And
I actually got in trouble for that at the corporate university I worked in.
Here's the question. They can't shoot you. Nobody ever got fired for doing that kind of thing. They may ask you to take it down, and then they'll ask you again in a couple of days, and they'll ask you again, and then they'll come in and they'll sit down and say, why is it that that's still there? To which you say, I like it.
So I got a question. Like when you were describing your friend Susan, who used the term larger in life as it was not a positive thing.
It was a cry for help. Like she thought there was something wrong with that.
Why do you think, because I see a lot of people who struggle with, and it could be about creativity, it could be about expressing themselves, but why do you think in large organizations or in any organization, creative people feel like that is a bad thing?
Because the culture of a corporation has mistaken order and predictability for productivity. And yet everything, the second habit of creative people is challenging assumptions. Assumptions are the way the company really works. It's not in the employee manual. It's not in the training. It's not on a memo. Nobody ever told you to do it that way. At Imagineering, the very first meeting, no, it wouldn't have been the first meeting. One of the very first meetings I went to, there was a couple of people there in white shirts and ties. And I thought, oh, they must be visiting from the studio, 8 minutes up the road. We were in Glendale, Disney Studios in Burbank. Then every meeting, white shirt and tie, white shirt. Come to find out, they're the engineers. Imagineering is creative ideas, imagination, with the technical know-how, engineering, architecture, fabrication, all that, to make those creative ideas come to work. By the way, Walt hated the word.
It's 3:00.
He called it WED Enterprises, Walter Elias Disney. And so I finally thought, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. What's the white shirt and ties? And I marched into the office of Orlando Ferrante, terrific guy, vice president of engineering. I said, oh, I've got a question. That was his nickname. Oh, I've got a question. Well, thanks. And I left the room. He said, come back here. You didn't ask me. I said, I got my answer. Sit down. What's the question? I said, every meeting I go to is a white shirt and a tie. And it's always an engineer. Discuss. He reeled back and laughed. He says, okay, you go to engineering school, your first day, they tell you this is about precision. And sometimes that's millionths of a something. So until you can actually be precise, you look precise. Now you get done with 4 years, 6 years of engineering school. That's all that's in your closet. So you come to work and there it is. And you meet the vice president of engineering. He's wearing, I said, that's why I left your office, because you're sitting there in a white shirt and a tie. I said, knock it off. This would be formal dress at Imagineering. You would be above average at Imagineering with a collared shirt. Ooh, John, is he a executive on the rise? It's a jeans and flip-flops and cowboy boots. And there are women there in slacks and dresses, and guys there in nice outfits and so on. So yeah, we did a day of creativity for engineers, and we cut everybody's tie off. In fact, we passed them down. They took turns cutting each other's tie off. And Orlando Ferrante took the tie that I'd cut of his, framed it, put it on his wall, and when you came as a new hire, he'd say, that's the only tie here at Imagineering. Now, you are certainly welcome to wear a tie, but don't wear one every day.
Yeah, and it gets into like what you talk about. Part of an organization's culture are its unspoken but shared assumptions around that culture, and that's having a culture is not optional. You have one. Being intentional about that culture, that's your choice. That's when it moves into being intentional and purposeful about the systems you're creating.
Yeah.
And even in that move of identifying the Thai culture, and then doing a very powerful thing of identifying shared assumptions and then choosing them on purpose.
Too often we that culture becomes deleterious to human spirit. We think we're establishing some kind of decorum, some kind of, and I go to some companies and I'll walk around the building and it's just too dang quiet. It's too quiet here, I'll yell. And people will just, I remember one night I was working late. This company that I'd gone in for a year for a special project. And I didn't know if anybody was there. It's like 7, 8 o'clock. And everybody's pretty much gone by 5:36. And I was typing something and I hit something on my computer that I couldn't recapture it and erased about 40 minutes of work. And I yelled a bad word. And because this was a religious nonprofit, I kind of waited there and I just yelled, sorry. And from the other end of the building, I heard, it's all right, McNair. Now, that person never came up to me at lunch and said that was funny last night or anything. And I knew there were, most of the people in the building wouldn't have cared. They would have understood, not because it was me, but I don't talk that way, but I just was mad at myself and I was saying it to me.
Yeah.
But we don't realize the effect we have on people by telling them, it's got to be this and this and this. And I say, speak up and say, why? Why? This is what works for me. This is what's comfortable for me. We had an executive at Disney, Michael Graves, built the new Disney, what they call the Team Disney building. It's the one you've seen pictures of the studio with the big Roman columns, and the 7 dwarfs, which is completely wrong. Dwarfs are down here and they're small. These were up here and they were huge. They were 12, 15 feet high. And I know the old sculptor that had to carve them and make the models for them. He swore the whole time, this is completely wrong. Dwarfs are not big and you don't look at them this way, you look at them. Anyway. Then they came around and they had this notebook of what you were allowed to hang on the walls in your office. And these were all executives in this building. Their staffs were other places. They may have an assistant or two, but their staffs were other places. And so I said, we've got to break that spell. So we did a thing called Office Anarchy for the best. And the guy that won, his office, he had none of the pictures that you're allowed to put up. And great art, right? You can imagine the stuff that was available to have hung in your office at Disney. He had nothing but his kids' pictures taped to the walls. He had none of the Michael Graves designed furniture, not a stick of it. He had a big old that he got at passing the Rose Bowl swap meet, because he said, those great rugs you have at the Adventures Club. I said, Rose Bowl swap meet. At an angle in his office, and not afforded, just not straight, and 3 beanbag chairs, 1 for him and 2 for whoever came in. And if you had a bigger meeting, he'd go to another room or he'd go out and get chairs. And he sat with his back to the door of his office, took the ringer out of his phone, and they said, well, you can just turn it off. He said, take it out. If you can turn it off, you can turn it off. Take the ringer out. And then he had a light, a very dim blue light over the door of his office that when it was ringing from his assistant, it would do this. And he said, if it was a rainy, darkish day and I didn't have my lamps on, also the other thing I told him was lamps, not overhead.
Yeah.
And what he did was he empowered his secretary to handle 90% of the calls that came in so he could get his work done. And it was his own space. And when they came by and said, well, I said, well, what do I tell that guy that goes around? They had a guy who I think he was director level for office space and the way it looked. And he said, tell the guy, this is what works for me. Thanks for stopping by. And I'll go away. Well, that led to a whole series of things, because this was at the studio, not Imagineering. Who cares? I mean, you name it, people direct. Well, what works for you? What's good? First of all, 90+% of the offices in that building never get visited by anybody from outside the company. So it's not like we're showing off. It's not like we have to put our best face forward. There's no face to put forward. The face is the outside of the building. That's what the world sees. And it's gorgeous. But what works for you? So that's why I say, get away with whatever you can get away with. However, one of the big things was secretaries, they had extra wide hallways. And so secretaries had these big desks and a return with, shelves that would close and so on. And then on the other side was another secretary. Well, they said the rule was you may only have 2 5x7 vertical 5x7 images in your workspace. And I'm doing this workshop for executive assistants called How to Give the Boss Exactly What He Wants in Spite of What He Asked For. And of course, the basic thing is give him what he asked for, then give him what you think he really needs. And when you give him both, you don't give him your version, give him both. He goes, yeah, that's what I wanted, thanks. And they said, but we want to do more pictures. What do we want to do? More than 2 pictures. I said, the problem is not 2. The answer is in the word vertical. Think. And the lady who's head of all the exec staff, I will order the glass tops this afternoon. So they got big glass tops, I think they're probably plexiglass, for these huge desks that these ladies had. And they could put hundreds of pictures under there. And he was like, oh, and they'd say, they're not vertical. Problem solved. Pay attention, get it done. And I finally said to the guy, I said, what if somebody wanted to have 87 pictures up? Well, it's the look. To who? For what?
Yeah. So I just did recorded a podcast I haven't edited yet on, I posted in Facebook a few weeks ago, just a, question mark around Birkenstocks, question mark, with socks, question mark. And I think I got more heated comments in that than any other, controversial post I've ever put up. And the point being that, there's most people were like, Birkenstocks never, or some people said, yeah, I like Birkenstocks, never socks. One person, I like their response is that socks cover a multitude of sins. But really, my point in that is that, back in the day when one of my lives, I was an outdoor educator and did a lot of backcountry stuff. And I carried Birkenstocks with me when we were doing programs. And in the middle of the night, you don't care if you got socks on or not. You got to get out and pee and you want to stay warm. You put Birkenstocks on with socks. And it doesn't matter what anybody says. It's all about what works.
Yeah.
So
I
that's
wear, and I know you know this, John, I wear unmatching socks every day of my life if I'm wearing socks. Today I'm not wearing socks. It's a nice warm day here in Colorado. I also wear Crocs. Now Crocs I never wear socks with. But it's so interesting that people come up to me after a keynote address, 2,000 college administrators, and somebody will say, your socks don't match. And I said, don't match what? Each other. Now, sometimes I buy socks in sets of 3. They are the same color palette with different designs. So they do match, but they're not the same design. And it's so interesting.
Yeah, there was a Harvard professor was teaching. She turned this into a study. She was doing the same presentation to essentially the same crowd, different individuals, but same population. And in one of them, she was up there in her, power dress and red heels, your really professional look. And she presented. And then in the second session, she put on her tennies. And when they asked the groups about her measure of authority, the groups felt she had more authority and more gravitas in the sneakers.
I'll tell you the one thing about unmatching socks. You never lose a sock. How would you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Hey, I want to follow up on something. Now, you spent time also as a youth, but then also in your professional life in religious Christian churches and organizations. Yep. And I want to ask you a little bit about what is it like to be a creative in the church? What are the challenges? What are the advantages? How can the church do a better job of cultivating the creative creators types?
If there's a kid in the high school youth group who was a whiz bang at chemistry and all that stuff, and said he was going to grow up and he was going to do an internship at Dow Chemical. Very interested in what they're doing. And Dow Chemical has made some pretty nasty stuff over the years, but they've also made some miraculous stuff. Nobody would say, oh, you can't be a Christian and work there. They make implements of war. But if a kid said he wanted to be a theater major and go to Broadway, they'd stand around and pray over him and so on. I was at a big church in Southern California whose name I will not use because it could have been any church. And I've literally had this conversation at a variety of churches and church conferences. And I've been in the church all my life. I mean, literally all my life. My folks were what I call professional Christians. My dad ran a Christian school in Southern California. And I still embrace boldly my biblical Christian faith. But it was about the time there was a big controversy about Disney, whether it's, has family values or not. And I said, well, first of all, they got the Disney Channel, which is a 24-hour family channel, more family oriented than anything anybody else is doing, including any church-related channel. They put out more product between Pixar and Disney Pictures and the Magic Kingdom and all the different parks, now 12 theme parks worldwide as we sit here and talk. And I said, I don't know, how many hours a week is this building open? Is your church open? And then somebody says, well, you've been in the theater all your life. You've been in the legitimate theater, the secular professional theater. Do they get on you for your Christian faith? Do they put you down? I said, you want to know the answer to that? I said, I'm going to tell you something that a lot of you are not going to like, but I hope you hear it, because there are young people in this congregation for whom this is or soon will be true. I have been in the professional secular theater since I was 13 years old. Never once has anybody put me down, made a snide remark, or said, you leave that stupid stuff. Once in the theater world, as no one's ever said has besmirched my faith. They will say, well, that's interesting. It's just something to believe in. I have 2 one-man plays. One of them, you mentioned, The Fifth Gospel. And my friends from that world will come and see it and say, oh, it's so great. You have something like that you believe in so much that you would create this work of art that's so powerful. Well, I was at Imagineering, and if I would be doing Fifth Gospel somewhere around Southern California, my Imagineering friends, who I many of whom I knew were not particularly people of faith or church people. And some I knew that began going to church because of conversations we had. Now, whereas no one in the professional theater has ever put down my faith, I have frequently been confronted by and criticized for being a Christian in the theater world by church people. How can you be in that world? And I said, well, first of all, it's who I am. How can I not be? You know, there are executives at Pixar and Disney that are strong, believing Christians. All throughout Hollywood, there are those people. They're rarer than Republicans, but they're there. And some of them, you know, somebody who I can mention because people know him because he's out there and talked about it. Ralph Winter, producer, did, you know, some of the X-Men films, did 3 of the Star Trek pictures. I mean, he's a big Hollywood, very well respected producer, strong church-going Christian fellow. Directors and all kinds of people like that out there. They're not in Hollywood because they're a Christian, or they're not fighting that. They are. Ralph Winter is who he is. Ralph is a movie producer. That's a certain skill, a certain skill set, which has multifaceted skills. It makes 3-dimensional chess look like eating a muffin. And there's no place in the church world for Ralph to be Ralph because it's too small. Not to put down church-oriented films. But we have got to, in our churches, be encouraging young, gifted people who will be screenwriters, who will be, you know, the man that wrote the script to Braveheart. Very strong Christian fellows. Last name happens to be Wallace. I think he spells it different. So,
well, real quick, why do you think the church has such a strong reaction against people who want to pursue creative endeavors?
They always have. There's a well-known denomination that for years it was against the church policy to attend the circus or the legitimate theater because it's full of, you know, fairies and leprechauns, freaks and goombas. But yet we tell the story at Easter or the story at Christmas with a big pageant, and people go, oh, now the story made sense to me. A few years ago, I was commissioned by Colorado Christian University, where I'm currently co-teaching this Disney class, to write a passion play. And I said, why don't I write the whole Jesus story? So we did. And I took my friend Jerry Jenkins' book, Matthew's Story. After he did the Left Behind series, he did the Jesus Chronicles, and they took each of the 4 apostles and did their story as a novel. So a lot of what's in those books are things that are conjecture. What would it be like to be a Jewish tax collector working for the Roman government? And so I used that as the basis for it. But I did say to Jerry ahead of time, now, if I get a place where I've got to fill in a story and I've got to jump over to Luke or Mark and grab it, I'm going to do that. I'm not going to be an idiot. There was a famous Jesus movie where the wise men do not appear in it. And they call it the most biblically accurate movie because the gospel they use didn't have the wise men in it. I said, well, that's stupid. And I'm not going to be stupid. Well, when I was done with the first draft, and I sent it to Jerry and I sent it to the woman, the drama coach at Colorado Christian University, I said, it's funnier than I thought it could be, but I promise you at no time in the writing of this did I say, this scene needs to be funnier. I wrote real dialogue of these 13 guys that we know of, and also Pontius Pilate and all these guys. And it turned out we did, every performance was sold out. There were pastors at all of them. When we did a Q&A after 3 of the performances, the first or second question every time was, I'm a pastor. McNair, it's very funny and enjoyable, not comedy funny. Why do we miss that? I said, because we think if Jesus laughs, he's weak. I think if Jesus laughs, he's more human and he's more powerful. We want him to be. Elton Trueblood, the Quaker theologian who wrote The Humor of Christ. Every Christian should read that book. He shows it's right there. These pastors say, how did you find the humor? I said, did I make anything up? There was only one joke that we added in, and Jerry said when he was writing the Matthew story, he did it again with Dr. Tim LaHaye, and he wanted to put this in, and Dr. LaHaye said, oh, it's too jokey. And Jesus is sitting talking with Matthew, and there's this fly, and he finally gets in, and Matthew says, you got him. And Jesus says, he'll be fine. And it's the Jesus that does the magic trick. It's the Jesus that helps us fix a relationship that we've screwed up ourselves. But other than that, there's a place where he's talking to the disciples and they're not paying attention. And they say, what's the greatest command? And he says, love God with everything you've got, your heart, your soul, your mind, your hands, and love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. And then this is a line I borrowed from Michael with the gospel. And don't forget to love yourself. Because if you don't, your neighbor's in for a very bad afternoon. And they're still not paying attention. He says, and one more thing. Oh, and he says, love your enemies the same way. It'll drive them nuts. And they're still not listening. So Jesus says, and one last commandment. Don't run with sharp objects. And they all stop and go, huh? I just wanted to see if you were listening.
So what do you think, the why? I think that it has a lot to do with disruptive thinking, that as a creative person, as an artist, as somebody who builds stuff, you're about changing your surroundings. You're about making a dent in the world and doing it on purpose. And that can be scary to people who have already arranged their world.
Yeah.
So I think there's that fear factor in there. What do you think the church can do better? There's some churches who are doing well and really inviting to artists and creative and builders. What do you think most churches can do better in order to create a place that is actually attractive and bringing that creative spirit in?
I attended a church in Pasadena for 9 years when I was at Imaginary All Saints. And we would have creative dance in the worship, not every Sunday, not even close. We'd have different styles of music. We had a Sunday every year, and I don't know how we picked it, but it was a Sunday where we reset some familiar hymns in terms of familiar lyrics to Native American melodies. And we would teach people, and they would sing it. We had some guys come in and do a tribal dance and so on. We had just all sorts of things. We'd have, rather than just reading the scripture, have a group of actors read it. One time I came up as to read the epistle. And I'm walking up, and I didn't have, at our church, as you walked in, you would get a 30-page document that had every hymn, every piece of scripture. The only thing that wasn't in there was the text of the sermon. It would just have the title. I'm walking up, and I have nothing in my hands. And the staff are sitting there trying to hand me. I said, I got it. And I reach into my pocket, and I pull out an envelope. I said, we got a letter from our buddy Paul today. He's traveling. What's the return address? Ephesus. He's in Ephesus. I mean, let's see what he has to say. And I pull it out. Dear Pasadenians. And then I read it straight. But I read it like a letter. And I timed it like reading a letter, not like I'm reading scripture. And I get done. Blessings to everybody there. Say hi to my buddy, George, our pastor. And got applause. In the 20-something year history of the church, reading the epistle had never gotten applause. That's the first service. As I'm walking off, George reaches up, grabs the letter from me. I get a call later that afternoon from a buddy of mine who's an actor. If you saw his face, you said, I think I've seen him in films. You have. He's never the star, but he's the police sergeant, he's the pastor, he's the whatever, in all kinds of movies and TV shows. He calls me and he says, you and your dang letter. I said, what? He said, George hands me this 5 minutes before. He said, use this. It's McNair's prop. And I look at it, and there's a thing actors do where they score. They put different lines to pauses and emphasis and so on. And I had scored the script a little bit different than he had scored his. So he just took his script, put it in the envelope, and they explained to him what I had done. Same reaction, got applause. Just that little thing. Here's another thing. Churches are full of rooms that are mostly empty and locked and closed. Pastors, you know who the artists are in your church. Ask them what night they want to teach a watercolor class for the next 6 weeks. Ask the local dance instructor for the junior college when she wants to come in and do a basic dance class, tap dancing class, whatever art history class, something. Open the building. As schools have less and less of the arts, churches should have more and more. Start there. If you did 1 or 2 classes, they will come out of the woodwork. When I go to churches, I tell them, now, we're going to do this. We're going to do my creativity workshop all day Saturday. I call it the curiosity tour, because if you say creativity, people self-select and don't come. Curiosity, all kinds of people come. Then I'll do my one-man show in the morning worship. Then at lunch, and you announce this for weeks in advance, we're going to have a creator's lunch. And we list who that would be. And it's things like gardeners, macrame artists, flower arrangers, woodworkers. We try to put everybody we can in there. Oh yeah, and people who are sketchers and painters and sculptors and so on. And the pastors are stunned. 100 people show up in a church of 500 people, or to, and from that it leads to other things. Just become a place where your community knows this plot of land, this little series of buildings is a place where artists and creators and so on have a home. If we can friggin' play basketball and have a softball team, we can have a watercolor class on Thursday nights.
Yeah, I was talking about this with Mike Brennan, and he says, you know what? I can imagine that getting the same response as youth groups did back in the early 70s. Oh, they'll just mess up the building.
I hope so.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
I'm old enough to remember the first time somebody stood up in church. That was Sunday night, though, not Sunday morning.
Of course.
With a guitar. And this was not a Catholic church. That would have been fine, Catholic church. And then eventually, I don't go to a church now anywhere on the planet, but what Sunday morning? There's a drummer, a bass player, and a couple of guitarists as a part of the worship team. Yep. Maybe the organ gets unlocked and played a little bit, and maybe not. What I say to churches is do both. Do a song with organ and piano, do a song with guitars, do a song a cappella, do it all, do all the flavor. Don't have, well, we've got the later service is the organ and piano service. The early.
Yeah. So this has been a great time, and I love this conversation. I love the format of being able to go this long, but I want to wrap up with asking you just a couple of quick hitting questions, and you don't have to sign your response away in blood or anything. You can change your mind, but just first thoughts. So what book or media do you most often give other people other than Hatch? What's your favorite book to give people?
It's one of those three that I mentioned, depending on where they are in life. The Orbiting the Giant Hairball, which would be for people wanting to find creativity or find rule breaking in a corporate setting. It's for personal stretching yourself, Twyla Thorpe's The Creative Habit. And it's for just personal, spiritual, and artistic renewal. Madeleine L'Engle, people know as the author of A Wrinkle in Time. Madeleine L'Engle's Walking on Water. I happen to be privileged enough to have known her. In fact, my very first book, I didn't know what to do with, and I was going to New York, and a friend said, go by the library at St. John the Divine, where she hung out. She was the librarian there. St. John the Divine is the big Episcopal cathedral in New York City. She read it, laughed out loud, said, you've got to get this in print. I said, who would do this? It's too funny for religious people, and it's too religious for normal people. He said, that's not up to you. Get it out there. And I was fortunate to get it with Harper and Row San Francisco, they had done Dick Gregory and some other, they did Frederick Buechner. So they kind of were breaking the rules in terms of religious publishing. But I would say those are the three, and any one of those, whether you're religious or not, you could have fun with and be inspired by. And I think, and I learned this from my friend Susan Kennedy, any good book, meaning valuable book, you can dip into and read a chapter, read a few pages, and get something out of it. Don't feel like you have to read the whole book. But those three books, you'd be hard-pressed not to, over some period of time, end up reading the whole book.
So what technology do you use the most? What technology do you think is really important for you or for others to use?
Well, I don't leave the house without my MacBook. I've got a MacBook Pro, and then I recently was looking at, I just said, I got to make it easier for myself. So I was looking at buying a used Mac Air, the smaller thing. And I was just about to buy one online, used. And I got a card from United Airlines that said, we notice you have a lot of miles. How about a new Apple product? And you open up this postcard, and here's every current Apple product: iPad, iPhone. So
Nice.
my MacBook Air, I got a brand new, all the bells and whistles, retina screen, so and so, for all my friggin' air miles. Because when you have that many air miles, John, you know this, last thing in life you want to do is, I want to go to an airport and get on an airplane. Nothing wrong with that. The best part about airplanes is it gets me where I want to go and need to go quickly. But
Yeah.
in terms of spending time, so that for writing. But then I always have with me one of my sketchbooks. Now, for years, I'd used the larger size. But
Uh-huh.
now I just found this at Hobby Lobby. Download the Hobby Lobby app, and every week you can get 40% off some item. So, and all my sketchbooks start out like this, looking like the wisdom of Al Gore or Kamala Harris. But then eventually they get filled up, and like the front of every sketchbook says, anything worth remembering is worth writing down. And then it's just pictures and ideas and sketches, and it nobody looks through this. I don't prevent people from looking through this, but I don't. It's not an art book. It's just stuff, and it might be notes at a conference. So a lot of the pages are going to look like that. So I'm not concerned. And when it's full, it's full. It doesn't fill up in a week or a month or whatever. It just fills up when it fills up. And I like this size because it fits. First of all, it fits on the outside pocket of my thing, and then I carry a couple of fistfuls of felt pens all the time. So those are the two main resources. There you go.
Yeah. So I was, I'm a believer in journals and writing things down. And for me, this one actually isn't a moleskin. It's a different brand that I like better, but it all depends on the pricing. But I heard, or I read a little essay about a little girl. They're a Midwestern town in the middle of a drought, and they're going to have a prayer meeting to pray for rain to end the drought. And everybody shows up, and this little girl shows up with a red umbrella. And they say, why are you bringing an umbrella? It hasn't rained for years or for months and months and months. Why did you bring an umbrella? Well, we're praying for rain, so I thought we might as well be ready for it. And so to me, the journal, I carry it around. I don't always write in it, but it always is a reminder that I got to run into something that I need. And so
I used to, before iPhones or phones with cameras in them, I always also carried a little Olympus camera. The other thing is, people say, well, some of that stuff is expensive. I think this was, with a 40% discount, maybe $10. I don't know, $12. Hobby Lobby has just come out with their own line of sketchbooks. I don't know if you can see.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bright. The bottom half is always the same. They've got spiral bound, hard bound, sketch pads, different kinds of paper. This is the hard bound spiral, but then also a regular, like a hard bound sketchbook. The line is called Master's Touch. When they first came out, they were 50% off, and they're already cheaper than like the Strathmore and the Kansan and all those. And what I tell people is go in, like my class at Colorado Christian University, I said, go get one, get the size. Don't get anything bigger than about 8x10 because you won't carry it with you. If you're not going to carry it with you, it's useless to have. And don't get anything smaller than this because you need a page where you can really put stuff on.
And it has to me, it has to lay flat so that you can get stuff in there.
And no lines. People say, well, I need lines. No, you don't. Take a piece of cardboard or take one of those pages with a Sharpie, make some lines, put it underneath. Now you've got your line page.
See, my only, I do dotted ones because of the way that you can photograph them. In some apps, you can take a picture of this and it will interpret your writing into text. So that's my only thing is the dots. I would prefer blank all the time. The other thing, and these things are called quivers.
Right.
I love these, and they make them in this size, the smaller size. They also make them 8.5 by 11 size. And so now I used to always stick my pin in the back of the spine here.
Right.
Rip out the spine. I get 4 pins, and I just added this to my collection, which is it's a Sharpie, but you put it in this case, and it's really cool.
See, I typically will have a pen or two right here, but also in my briefcase, I've got probably 30, 40 different colored pens. This particular thing here, and I keep it folded under, but it comes with a latch like that.
Yeah.
That you can put a pen in, which I carry a pen, but I don't keep that closed because if it's closed like that, I just think in my head, oh, it's going to be too much work.
Yeah.
Pull this out, take this apart, and so I keep this tucked in.
Yeah, this is my pin case when I'm like in a meeting or whatever, and I want to try and get more visual with my notes. That's what I do.
Perfect.
So, Well, now I'm so fun that we got a chance to geek out about the importance of journals and I throw it out there. I say technology on purpose because I don't want to talk just about apps or things like that, but because I do believe the journal is technology,
Sure.
and there's a lot about typing versus writing as far as how it connects the brain science to it. So I'm glad we got a chance to geek out about that.
In the same way that in Hatch, there's a chapter on doodling. In the new book, there's a chapter on the value of carrying a sketchbook, not a journal, not a diary, a sketchbook. There may be journal aspects to your sketchbook, but a sketchbook. That chapter is so long now that I just have the highlights. And what I'm going to do is do a page on the new McNairWilson.com relaunched website that has all the, here's the pros and cons of getting this kind of sketchbook, this kind of sketchbook, this kind of sketchbook, and so on. I mean, in my dreams, I'll get Hobby Lobby to be a sponsor, but until then, at least, encouraging people. And when you get down to it, it's what you will use. That's the best thing.
Yeah.
Well,
it gets to, I think I stole this from you, but who knows? The idea that, anything worth doing is worth doing well, but anything worth starting is worth starting poorly.
This is what I write notes with,
Yeah.
And I've got several of those in different colors. I happen to like the Pilot Razor for note taking, but my day in, day out pen has been around since the 60s, and it's the Pentel Sign Pen. Comes in 11 colors. Originally, it was a bamboo point. Now it's felt pen. I think there's two different blues: gray, beige, brown, yellow, green, so on. That's my favorite day to day because with this I can sketch and write notes.
Yeah. Well, Craig McNair Wilson C. Wilson McNair.
Let me just say a real quick note about that.
Yeah.
My very first cartoon was published in the Pasadena Star News when I was 10. There was a space about this big in the middle of the comic section that always had an ad. So I sent a cartoon. I said, don't put an ad there. You need another cartoon. Here it is. I signed it McNair so that I knew the only people who would know that it was me would be my mom and dad, just in case other people knew. They wouldn't be embarrassed because I signed it. So I just got in the habit of signing all my cartoons McNair. And when I was at the Wittenberg door, all my cartoons were McNair, so on. It was my grandfather's middle name. My dad's dad was Clarence McNair Wilson. 1996, I found out what McNair means. He didn't know. He knew it was 7th generation. I knew the Mick was son of, I didn't know what the Nair was. It means son of the servant. Because of my background in the theater and the ritual of bowing, humbling ourselves to the audience, saying we do this to you, it reminds me of wherever I am, a keynote address, a theatrical production, that my life is about serving others. So anybody that knew me before 96 will probably call me Craig. That's fine. I never correct anybody. And after that, it'll be McNair. I have a couple of friends here in Colorado Springs who've only known me here the last 10 years who like Craig. They call me Craig. I never correct anybody, but it's how I carbon date my friends.
Yeah, I love that you got a chance to talk about that because we've talked about it before. And I have a similar experience. I know where I know people by what they call me. I've got Bear, Johnny, John, Mr. Losi. And so I know
I know your nickname Bear, I just don't use it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you don't necessarily know me as that, although I think you did a sketch. Bruce Johnson did a sketch of me as Bear. Okay. But yeah, I never thought of it that way until you talked about the carbon dating approach to help.
But you were Bear when you were at Forest Home and we were working the ropes course stuff, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I knew you then, but I knew you before. I think our relationship started when I started attending the youth workers conferences.
Okay.
And then I brought you up to help do a rethinking, a reimagining of Indian Village. And then we also did the same thing with the challenge course stuff. Yep. So I leaned on you heavily back then.
It's interesting when I tell people about the challenge course and the ropes course, I said, now this is going to sound foreign to all of you. Because they said, well, of course the camp has a ropes course. I said, my friend John did a ropes course before people even knew what the term ropes course means. And they had the perfect place for it. I remember the first family camp I did when the ropes course was there, and I went up the wall and I got to top and I just languished over the side with her. And one of the dads yelled, "McNair, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I did a whole stupid general session on taking risks. I better prove it." It was fun, but not easy.
Yeah, and I owe that.
Nobody looks at me and thinks, "Ooh, challenge wall."
Yeah. It goes back to, I mean, if you remember Stan White, Gray Owl.
I've tried to forget him, but it's
he put up what they called the confidence course in Indian Village, and that was back in the 60s.
Yeah.
And a lot of that, the whole challenge course industry and ropes course industry sprung from those outdoor people that took hemp rope and wrapped it around trees and had kids crawling around on them.
Well, and the evolution that everybody would understand would be basic training in any of the military thing. That led to those guys going home and being dads and putting the same thing together for scout jamborees.
Yeah.
So it made sense that church camps or any camp would then have them.
Yeah. So Craig, there's so much more. I look forward to the next time we're in the same room together to chat some more and tell stories. Thank you so much for taking the time today.